My name is Claire. I'm 36, and I'm an art restorer. Life hadn't prepared me for what I found that day. The gentle idea of a peaceful Sunday quickly dissipated, replaced by a storm of emotions I struggled to contain. The sun beat down on my face as I strolled through the flea market. A usual, though unplanned, visit. A lingering vestige of childhood happiness disguised amongst trinkets and forgotten objects. But I didn't know that my parents' garage sale would change everything. Arriving at their small house on the outskirts of town, I noticed the bustle of people crowding around tables laden with items. I found my parents' arrangement odd. It was as if suddenly, our family history could be reduced to low-value, insignificant items. As I entered, the scent of aged wood and old paper filled the air, a nostalgic blend that seemed to whisper the secrets of our past. Then, amongst broken bottles and worn-out toys, I saw something that stopped my heart. Comment where you're watching from. It's always amazing to see how far this story is reaching. And if you've gone through something similar, know that you're not alone. Like and subscribe to stay with us. It was the painting I used to admire in our living room, a piece I always considered worthless, but which held deep meaning for me. A portrait of a forest in shades of green and ochre, painted by an unknown artist. Yet somehow it always transported me to a safe place in my childhood. My mother's trembling hands were pushing the canvas toward a potential buyer. It was like watching a slow-motion movie. No, I murmured to myself, but reality struck, and I remained frozen. They didn't know their sale was my discovery. My parents' expression of disinterest tightened my chest even further. How could they be so detached from something that, to me, held so many memories? There I was, the art restorer, surrounded by seemingly valueless objects, while a burning rage, pain, and betrayal began to consume me. My parents were discarding integral parts of my history, things that held far deeper significance than they believed. What was a garage sale for them was a funeral for me. Back home after the sale, I sat with the canvas before me. The empty space where the painting once hung seemed to echo the voices of the past, and as I observed it closely, my hands caressed its surface. The tear in the bottom right corner, the dirt accumulated over the years. It was all part of its charm. It was like worn skin, a story told in colors. Come on, Claire, I told myself. Use your skills. It was a choice, to let this pain define my life, or to use my passion to transform it. I decided this artwork needed restoring, not just for its aesthetic value, but for the reverence its history carried. Picking up my materials, I embarked on a mission of rediscovery. Studying each brushstroke and each layer of paint covering the aged canvas, time seemed irrelevant. I knew there was a story waiting to be revealed. What else could the painting tell me? What secrets might it hide beneath its impassivity? I set about examining the canvas under the intense light of my workshop. A combination of technical skill and intuition guided me. Examining the blend of paints, I began to notice something intriguing. The greens weren't just green. They had nuances, subtle shifts, that seemed to tell a unique story. This painting was more alive than ever to me. With each detail I investigated, my determination grew. The insignificant appearance my parents had ignored was reconfigured into an artistic feat worthy of a renowned artist. If I could discover its origins, I could undo the betrayal I felt. In a surge of unwavering determination, I devised a plan. The painting they once considered mere decoration would become the heart of my renewed professional journey. Something bigger was at stake, and I was about to embark on a quest that would not only define my future, but also reconnect me with everything truly valuable in my life. So, with the canvas before me and its story pulsing in my veins, I prepared for the next step, uncovering the authenticity and value this painting could bring. It was time to show everyone that, even amidst betrayal, I could transform pain into art. Through my gaze and, hopefully, my touch, everything could be transformed again. I just needed the courage to move forward and the clarity to stay focused on the discovery of the lost artwork. As I threw myself into the quest to rediscover the painting, my mind wandered involuntarily to childhood memories. I recalled afternoons spent in my parents' living room, where the canvas danced in the soft light filtering through the windows. It was our refuge, a sanctuary of emotions and precious moments. "Look, Claire," my mother would say, pointing to the artwork. "This painting holds a story. One day, you'll understand." At the time, the meaning was too complex for me to grasp. Now, however, there was a weight of urgency in those words. Growing up, I always felt our house was more than just a building. It was a museum of experiences, a treasure chest overflowing with stories each object held. There were toys I loved unpretentiously, books worn thin from countless readings, and of course the painting. This connection to the objects felt so natural. However, as time went on, that feeling slowly started to fade as my parents began to see the items in the house as burdens. One morning, while I was in high school, I overheard my mother arguing with my father in the kitchen, their voices rising in urgency. "We need to make space," she insisted. "We're keeping things we don't even know where we found." I couldn't understand. How could they want to get rid of what was so precious to me? It was as if each of their words had struck a blow to my heart. That conversation left me uneasy, especially when I realized that the treasures of my childhood were being considered mere things to be discarded. Later, when I learned that the garage sale was scheduled, I couldn't contain my anxiety. What I feared finally happened. A cycle of loss began with the first sale of what remained of our home. The painting that once offered me comfort became just one of many decorative pieces, a silent complainant in a house that was falling apart. This pain became a considerable echo, reverberating in every corner of my soul. When I found it again days after the sale, right there in front of me, I knew I had to fight for it. I, an art restorer, understood that each mark on the canvas wasn't just an aesthetic plan, but a chronicle of emotion, melancholy, joy, and pain. It wasn't just a piece, it was part of my identity. With this realization, a plan began to form. The shadows of my past were intertwined with the nuances of the painting. The wrinkled texture and faded colors suggested stories that could be told, and I intended to be their spokesperson. With my restoration experience, I knew my technical knowledge could be useful. Picking up my materials, I embarked on a mission of rediscovery. The painting was waiting for a second chance, and I couldn't let that opportunity slip away. Soon, the subtleties of that canvas began to reveal themselves. As I examined each layer of paint under the intense light of my studio, I realized I was literally unfolding time. The greens weren't mere greens. They had nuances, oscillations that revealed a vibrant past. With each brushstroke, each wear, I saw life pulsate, and it was as if the art itself was whispering to me in a language I was beginning to understand. It was more alive than ever to me. The determination to recover this painting, and by extension, the history of my childhood, grew with each moment I looked at it. If I could discover where it came from, I could reverse all the betrayal I had felt. This single piece could be the core not only of my restoration journey, but of my evolution as a person. My heart quickened with the idea of reconnecting with the loose ends of my past, with everything it meant. My childhood, my dreams, all buried under layers of paint. With this clear vision in mind, I sought the help of Lucas, the art historian. Lucas was an intriguing figure, one of the most respected experts in ancient art. We had met at an art conference, where his methodical and skeptical approach often contrasted with my exuberant passion. He was the kind of person who would spend months analyzing every detail of a painting, researching its provenance, while I was more interested in how the painting made me feel. Our styles were opposite, but I knew his knowledge could be the key to understanding the value of my discovery. I quickly got in touch. 2 days of waiting felt heavy, but I finally received a positive response from Lucas, indicating that he was willing to listen to me. I scheduled a meeting at his studio, a place described by others as a sanctuary for art, full of books, works in the process of restoration, and an almost mystical energy in the air, as if I were entering a sacred space of wisdom. That day, I came prepared, with the painting carefully wrapped. The concern about the impression I would make was palpable. I wanted him to see the importance of that artwork. Upon arrival, I was greeted by the familiar smell of solvents and old books. The filtered light that invaded the space made everything majestic, coloring the air with promise and expectation. Lucas was standing in front of a canvas covered with a white cloth. Upon seeing me, his eyes were attentive. "Claire?" he said with a tone of curiosity. "I saw your message. What have you brought for me?" I began to carefully unwrap the package, feeling the pulsating adrenaline inside me. I mentioned the history of the painting, how much it meant to me, and why my search for its authenticity was so vital. He looked at the canvas. His gaze briefly swept over it, but there was an undeniable skepticism on his face. "And what makes you think there's anything special about this artwork?" His coldest inquiry felt like a bucket of cold water on the fire of my passion. But instead of discouraging me, it spurred me on to defend my position. "Lucas," I said, my voice growing firmer, "it's not just about the monetary value. It's about what this painting represents to me and what it can tell the world." At the heart of my speech, I realized there was a need for validation. He sighed, assessing my determination. "All right, Claire, let's begin, but I need documentation. Without it, it will be difficult to get any support." With his reluctance, a small spark of hope began to flicker within me. Over the following weeks, we plunged into research, the tension unwinding as we gathered information about the painting and its provenance. Our discussions became more intense and interwoven. He spent hours immersed in books and archives, while I bubbled with enthusiasm, sharing every small discovery that linked the artwork to notable historical and artistic moments. The hours we spent working together seemed to transform into a true exchange of ideas. Lucas possessed incredible knowledge, and while I challenged his logic, he questioned my intuition. Our interactions ranged from clashes of ideas to a slowly forming mutual respect. He began to see the value of the painting in a new light, and I realized I was also touching his emotional side, something he usually kept guarded. In this space, I felt we were both progressing, not only in our research but on a more intimate and human level. We were reconnecting with the art and with the life it brought to people. Each new discovery about the painting not only expanded our understanding of the artwork, but also united us more as partners in this quest. Discussions about art history became more than theory. They were a spiral of feelings and memories, things I thought I had lost along with the canvas. We had a greater purpose, a deep desire to do what was right in the search for the truth behind the art. And because of this, the painting became a symbol of our partnership. With each new layer of paint we revealed, we approached not only the authenticity of the artwork, but also the rediscovery of ourselves. The journey unfolding before us was more than a simple quest for authenticity. It was about rewriting the narrative of neglected lives, about reconstructing the road of pain and joy that brought us once again to the party of art. And so, the painting became more than a visual representation. It was the metaphor of a new beginning. Now we were ready to move forward and discover what more this artwork could teach us. Time began to slip through our fingers like an invisible thread as Lucas and I pursued our quest. Our meetings became a routine, and each conversation delved deeper into the nuances of the painting, its micro-layers of authenticity, and the story it could tell. With each new discovery, adrenaline coursed through my veins, mixed with the thrill of knowing we were on the verge of something monumental. My entire focus was on the strategies I could employ to validate the artwork that had been sold as a mere decorative object. However, as we delved deeper into our investigation, I encountered the frustrating challenges that came with the discovery. On a particularly busy morning, Lucas and I found an old document in the local library's archives that seemed promising. It was a record of a relatively unknown artist, someone mentioned in a small newspaper article about art exhibitions in our city. Enthusiasm sparked in my eyes as I began to examine the details. The artist was described as a misunderstood genius who worked in an often overlooked style. What we discovered could be the key to understanding not only the painting's origin, but also why it was all so important. "We need to confirm if this painting has a real connection to this artist," I said, my mind buzzing with ideas and possibilities. Lucas nodded. He knew this was just the beginning of a winding road. I knew our journey wouldn't be easy. Amidst our meetings, Lucas's distrust and skepticism began to give way to genuine curiosity. He was starting to understand the passion that permeated my quest, and consequently my life. If before he saw art only as an object of study, now he saw me as someone determined to give voice to a forgotten story. "You have to make sure what we find is documented, Claire," he reminded me. And so, we began collecting data. Lucas encouraged me to seek secondary sources that could help in the fight for the painting's authenticity. I discovered that it was necessary to gather information about the artist, his techniques, and even his influences. Each new clue became a new challenge, alluring me with the promise of unknown revelations. It wasn't just the artwork that fascinated me, but the narrative, the piecing together of the true story behind it. That sunny afternoon, on the ground floor of the library, I was sifting through boxes of documents aged and faded by time. My hands trembled with excitement as I found some photographs from the artist's exhibition, showing paintings that aligned incredibly well with the style of my painting. My heart pounded as I realized these were no mere coincidences. This could be the first connection, a link from times past that tied my artwork to a forgotten genius. The overexposure of the photo revealed a detail that left me breathless, a signature that was strikingly similar to that of our painting. "Lucas," I called out, my voice almost echoing in the fringes of the library's silence. When he turned, I saw in his eyes an expectation that only grew when I showed him the photograph. "Look at this. The signature is similar. We have to find out if he painted it." Lucas approached, studying the image with the narrowed eyes of a scientist analyzing a sample. Enthusiasm mingled with the caution that always accompanied him. "This is just the beginning, Claire. We need more to build a solid case." I nodded, understanding. The quest for authenticity wasn't easy, and the pressure to deliver results intensified daily. The next step was clear. Who else might have information about the artist? I delved into researching archaeologists, curators, and other art historians who might have paid attention to the works of this forgotten genius. One afternoon, in a conversation with Lucas, he mentioned a curator at a small local museum who might have historical data on the artist and his exhibitions. The curator, Mr. Almeida, was respected in the community and knowledgeable about the works of 20th century artists. We arranged to meet at his museum, which, incredibly, was a former factory transformed into a cultural center. It was saturated with history, each wall holding the memories we sought. We arrived at the museum, and the atmosphere was so thick it felt like the air pulsed. As we approached Mr. Almeida, I felt his presence illuminate the room. He seemed like a living encyclopedia, his gaze reassuring, his voice carrying the weight of wisdom. "Ah, the painting by the artist whose name is fading with time," he said, with a touch of compassion and respect upon hearing our story. I knew him personally. He was a passionate man, but misunderstood. His art never received the recognition it deserved. Those words struck a chord within me. I understood the feeling of being misunderstood. "You've only made me want to discover more about him," I replied, my heart pounding with a mix of empathy and determination. Mr. Almeida began to share insightful stories about the artist, his struggles, his triumphs, and how a certain artwork was considered not just an act of creation, but a desperate cry for recognition. Each analysis infused my heart with the energy I sought, and I knew I was closer than I expected to finding it. The narrative the painting could tell was interconnected, not only to me, but to the struggles of everyone who came before me. After a few hours of conversation, Mr. Almeida handed us some documents and fragments about the artist's exhibitions, something that could validate him as the author of the artwork I had found. "Use this well," he suggested, looking directly into my eyes. "Every artwork has a story, and yours might finally be told." With a handful of evidence in hand, Lucas and I left the museum with a renewed purpose. We knew the next phase was beginning, and this phase meant facing not only the quest for the painting's authenticity, but also confronting the doubts and challenges that might arise from critics who always doubted the truth we carried. Now, more than ever, it was clear we were on the right path toward a new discovery, not only about the painting, but about each of us. The journey was just beginning, but each step was aligning with the destiny I so longed for and the opportunities that presented themselves. What was once my solitary story was now a testament to the connection between art and humanity, a bond that was beginning to intertwine our lives in a way I could never have imagined. Together, exploring this new world, our destinies were about to become even more intertwined. As we left the museum in the soft light of dusk, I felt something had shifted within me. What had once been a personal quest for a piece of history had now become an almost sacred mission. The papers Mr. Almeida had given us felt heavy, not just because of their content, but because of the potential they held. Amidst all this, I looked at Lucas, whose expression mirrored the same mix of excitement and apprehension that I felt. "We were so close and yet so far," I said, my gaze fixed on the documents. "We need to go beyond the physical evidence. We need to connect the painting to the artist's soul." The following days became a mini research marathon. We meticulously planned and organized our time, creating schedules and lists. Which document would we seek first? What would be the next exhibition we could investigate? Enthusiasm propelled us, and with each new hour of research, each new document we analyzed, we were deconstructing and reconstructing the painting's narrative. One afternoon, deep in the archives, Lucas was reviewing some books when he called me over with an expression that mixed surprise and curiosity. "Claire, look at this," he said, pulling out an old book on contemporary art. He showed me an image of a painting exhibited in the 1950s that looked strikingly similar to the one we had. This could be a direct link to our artist. My heart pounded. The painting in the image showed not only a similar technique, but also a particular theme of fighting oppression that had been a recurring motif in our discussions. Samuel Ribeiro. He had a famous exhibition in Paris, and few people attended. Lucas emphasized, excitement growing in his voice. "We can use this to our advantage." This discovery was a watershed moment. With the data we obtained, our research now had a concrete narrative. We started collecting items from that exhibition, and, with that, I came to a sad realization. How could these voices have been so quickly forgotten? We continued to search through dozens of portfolios, old exhibitions, interviews, and publications that provided more context about his life and work. Each new reading brought a new layer to the story we were retelling together. And with that, fascinating stories about underestimated artists began to emerge, revealing not only the social impact of art, but its reflections on our own lives. One morning, leaving the library, I noticed a small cafe near the entrance. There was something nostalgic about the place, reminding me of afternoons in my childhood, sitting beside my father, listening to his stories while enjoying cakes and coffee. It brought a smile to my face, and I decided we needed a break. As we entered, the aroma of fresh coffee and the comforting sounds of murmurs and laughter enveloped us. The setting was perfect for discussing the challenges we'd faced on our journey. Over coffee, with the scent of freshly baked bread filling the air, Lucas began to share his frustrations about the negative reactions we'd encountered from some of our contacts. "Some critics seem so closed off to new narratives, Claire. It's like they can't open their minds to new possibilities," he vented, his expression a mix of discouragement and defiance. "It's like we're fighting against countless walls of indifference." With attentive eyes, I listened to every word, knowing that the fight to validate the painting and its authenticity wasn't just about the artwork itself, but also about all the creators whose voices were buried under layers of indifference. "Lucas, we're part of something bigger. This isn't just about us, but about all those who haven't had a chance to shine. We need to keep going." These words seemed to give Lucas new breath. A glint in his eyes showed he was beginning to understand the importance of our quest, not just for us, but for all the artists whose stories had been forgotten. Days passed, and the connection between us deepened. It was almost as if we were creating our own masterpiece. Each piece of information we gathered, each anecdote we found, brought us closer. I barely noticed that what had begun as a restoration project had become a life project. Then, a crucial moment approached. We decided it was time to present our findings to a larger group, an audience that included critics and collectors who could open doors for us. The art gallery offer was looming, and for that, we needed not only the painting, but also a strong argument to lend credibility to our work. The day of the presentation finally arrived, and the tension was palpable. I mentally reviewed the points we discussed, the evidence and truths I would present. I wasn't just there to talk about the artwork. I was there to defend a legacy that had been neglected. As we prepared the gallery, the day brought its own stresses. Looking at the space, the white walls seemed poised to absorb all the emotions we were about to unleash. Lucas was checking the documents we'd gathered, and I felt my hands sweating, my body a mix of anxiety and anticipation. "We're ready, aren't we?" I asked, my gaze fixed on his. "Yes, we just need to remember what we represent here," he replied, his determination radiating as he prepared himself. What was just a painting had become the symbol of a struggle far greater than we could have imagined. As the audience began to arrive, I could feel my heart racing. The murmur of conversations mingled with the soft music echoing through the gallery, and I remember feeling a touch of nostalgia. It was the same feeling I had as a child, the desire to be recognized, to be part of something grand. With the laughter and interactions around me, I knew that those who could change the future of that painting, and by extension, my story, were present. Finally, the moment arrived. The gallery lights focused on us as Lucas began to share the rich tapestry of the artist's story and its connection to the artwork. My eyes scanned the room as he spoke. Each attendee seemed to absorb the depth of the art we were presenting. Dr. Eduardo was among the audience, his gaze fixed on the painting as we heard the echoes of our voices blending with our fight for the truth. Each word spoken seemed to bring the artwork closer to the recognition it deserved. When it was finally my turn, my voice trembled, but it was imbued with a deep feeling. I spoke about the emotional connection between the artwork and the history we were trying to recover. I mentioned the artist's struggles and how they intimately aligned with my own experiences. At the end of the presentation, a silence followed. I took a deep breath and waited for Lucas's words and mine to resonate in the minds of those who had listened. The first applause echoed, and gradually, the room filled with vibrant sound, almost like a wave energetically washing over those present. It was a moment of collective recognition, and something was just beginning to transform. We were about to be reborn, both the painting and the story it represented, and deep down, I knew this journey wasn't just about me, Lucas, or a forgotten artist. It was about a new way of seeing art and embracing our truths. With that, the confidence that had only been emerging was now firmly established, not just in us, but in the horde of voices waiting to be heard. It was the beginning of a new chapter, not only for the lost artwork, but also for each of us. The applause in the gallery was like music to my ears, resonating in an echo of collective recognition that sent a wave of warmth to my soul. Excitement and a deep-seated pride filled every corner of my being. I noticed the anticipation on the faces of the audience, and a group of critics seemed engrossed in our words. The journey that began with my parents' betrayal in selling the painting I loved so much was now transforming into a celebration of the past, a recognition of the struggle that this artwork and its creator had faced. My heart pounded as I locked eyes with Lucas, his eyes shining with an emotion mirroring my own. When we finished, silence descended. I waited expectantly, taking a moment to breathe and let the words we'd just shared settle in the air. The space was filled with a new, vibrant energy, brimming with potential. The first unexpected clap sounded like a clarion call, initiating a slow but captivating wave of approval that spread through the room. With it came a poignant expectation, an expectation of the transformation we were fostering. The new narrative we were crafting for the painting wasn't just an artistic rehabilitation. It was also a reclamation of its dignity and the struggle of many who, like Samuel Ribeiro, had been silenced by time. This moment was about the fight for truth. We had broken the chains binding the art to the shadows of obsolescence. We need to make people understand the relevance of this artist and his work, I murmured to Lucas as the applause continued. He nodded, the same determination I felt beginning to permeate every part of our being. The artist wasn't the only one reborn. We were being reborn with her. The impact of the presentation was swift. Soon, contacts began to emerge. Newspapers started covering the story, attracting new readers drawn in by each new discovery. I was bombarded with messages and emails, each one knocking on the doors of what we termed the creative industry. Curators from various institutions reached out, eager to discuss the possibility of exhibitions and panels on Samuel's work. The warmth of the unheard voices was starting to gain momentum. We maintained frequent contact with Dr. Eduardo, who had become a strong ally. His critical perspective helped shape our narrative, and he proved willing to promote an exhibition dedicated to forgotten artists, with the painting as the centerpiece. Of course, the idea of being at the center of something of this magnitude was both terrifying and exhilarating. It was a world I had only dreamed of participating in before. With each passing day, the echoes of truth began to be heard. The inbox of positive responses overflowed, and publications that had once ignored the artists in our community were now opening spaces for discussions about art and its emotional content. A true artistic renaissance was occurring in our little corner of the world, and I was at the epicenter of this whirlwind. The struggle for recognition had become a broad platform, and we felt we were changing not only lives, but perceptions. Still, an undeniable sense of responsibility weighed heavily on me. As an art restorer, I had always worked to validate the authenticity of artworks. Now, suddenly, the responsibility weighed in a more encompassing sense. I wasn't just restoring a painting, I was rewriting its history and giving meaning to an entire artistic legacy. Claire, we need to prepare people to see not just the artwork, but the truth residing within it, Lucas said one evening as we worked on a plan to promote the exhibition. He sat at the table, brimming with ideas and notes, discussing how we could connect the audience to the artist's narrative. Exactly, I agreed. We need to tell his story, how he felt when his art didn't receive the recognition it deserved. The story of his struggle mirrors my own. We constructed a script for the exhibition, focusing on the emotional connection people would need to feel. We planned to include video testimonials from contemporary artists who recounted their own struggles and feelings of being misunderstood. We felt this would help create a rich analysis not only of Samuel Ribeiro's work, but of all those who have been, and still are, on the front lines of the artistic struggle for validation. As the day of the exhibition opening approached, a frenzy of emotions overwhelmed me. There was palpable anxiety, but also an electrifying excitement. The gallery space was transforming, every detail and decoration reflecting the artist's soul. The new narrative was woven into every corner of the gallery, as if Samuel himself was about to make a triumphant entrance. The opening day finally arrived. The space was decorated with an aesthetic that celebrated the unique beauty of Samuel's work. Warm light illuminated every corner, and the aroma of canapés and fresh coffee filled the air as people began to arrive. Faces were adorned with curiosity and anticipation. Lucas and I anxiously awaited the arrival of Dr. Eduardo and other critics who had promised to attend. My heart leaped when I spotted Dr. Eduardo at the entrance. He approached, a smile on his face. "I'm eager to see how this all unfolded, Claire. The impact you've strived to create is admirable." As we were introduced to new people, curators, critics, and art enthusiasts, there was a growing sense of accomplishment. Other artists were also present, their quiet voices imbued with empathy. We were all gathered in a shared space, united by the pursuit of a more meaningful art life. When we began the presentation, all attention was focused on us. I presented Samuel Ribeiro's story as an act of struggle and transformation, highlighting the connection art has with each of us. As I spoke, I tried to capture the essence of every artist present in the room. What we see in this painting is not just art, but a story of hope, struggle, and resilience. Through it, we are reminded that the voices that were once silenced can return with power through art, I said, feeling the energy in the room resonate with the depth of what was being said. My eyes shone as I looked back at Lucas, standing proudly beside me. The audience's attentive expressions reflected the connection we were forging. This wasn't just the story of a forgotten artist. It was a retelling that resonated with all of us who struggle for validation in a world that often ignores our struggles. And when the painting was finally unveiled, a wave of emotion washed over the room. People drew closer, observing far more than simple brushstrokes. They were witnessing a lost soul, finally being recognized, a story being rewritten. What began as a journey of loss transformed into a celebration of rebirth, not only for Samuel, but for all of us who accompanied him. In that space, we were reborn together, art and life intertwining in a rich tapestry of emotion and feeling. As the night wore on, and the faces around me lit up with the stories that began to emerge, I realized there was a deeper, more palpable way to experience art, not just as a restorer, but as a messenger of a new future. At that moment, I saw that the true discovery lay not only in the rediscovery of the painting, but also in the ability to encourage and unite the voices waiting for recognition. When the night ended, the echoes of that exhibition remained, but more than that, they left an indelible mark on each of us. We were now part of a new story that was just beginning, one that would give space to new voices, new art, and new experiences that would transcend every stretch made throughout time. Simultaneously, I understood that art, in its essence, was a form of resistance, a journey of reclamation that would explore beauty and struggle, even in the darkest of circumstances. We were about to take this conversation to the world, and with it, the essence of our lives could be perfectly woven into the tapestry of survival, where every creator, every story, every person would have their rightful place. The echoes of the exhibition still resonated in the gallery as I left the event, my heart pounding with a mixture of relief and hope. I knew the journey was far from over, but the impact we had managed to generate could not be underestimated. The recognition of Samuel Ribeiro's legacy was only the beginning. Now, with the painting highlighted and the story being told, I felt it was my mission, as a restorer and storyteller, to take the fight for art even further. The weeks following the presentation were electric. The stream of news and stories that emerged from it was nothing short of astonishing. In a few days, the question, "Who was Samuel Ribeiro?" spread like wildfire, once again placing his story at the center of the contemporary art conversation. Parallel exhibitions were launched, dedicated not only to his work, but also to forgotten and underestimated artists, focusing on giving a voice to those who had been marginalized throughout art history. As Samuel's popularity grew on social media and in art magazines, I realized that the life of that artist was beginning to intertwine with that of many other artistic figures who, like him, had not received the recognition they deserved. That movement not only rescued an artistic influence, but also fueled a cultural debate about the voices that had remained silent. I was aware, however, that not everyone was willing to accept the changes we were promoting. It was on one of those hectic days that I received an unexpected call from Roberto Silva. Surprised by the reserved tone of the conversation, I agreed to meet him for coffee. As we sat in a bustling coffee shop, I could sense his resistance and hesitation when it came to the work we had done. "Claire, you know I appreciate art in its purest forms, but my responsibility as a critic is to be rigorous," he began, leaning forward to appear more confident. "My concerns about the painting's authenticity remain. I'm skeptical about all of this." I knew Roberto was a tough critic, but on the other hand, his presence in the art scene was undeniably significant. "Roberto," I replied, trying to remain calm, "we're not just here to create a sensational story. We're bringing to light truths that have been ignored for too long. The research we conducted, the chemical analysis, it all raises questions that need to be answered." He watched me, his eyes assessing my determination. "Are you willing to dismiss the seriousness of criticism in the name of what may be an artistic fairy tale?" He hesitated, as if weighing his words. "I'm sure you see the value of scrutiny. I'm sorry to disagree, but this artwork is much more than you want to believe," I replied, feeling the passion bubbling inside me. "It's the life of an artist who has a story and deserves to be told. It's not just a piece of art, but a vital message that longs to be heard and presented." Roberto remained silent for a long moment, his eyes, a mixture of skepticism and curiosity, shifted. You may be right. However, be prepared. When this enters the history books, there will be a wave of reactions, and not all of them will be favorable. After our meeting, I felt our struggle was far from over. Not only were we facing external challenges and skepticism, but we needed to pave the way for the lasting recognition of Samuel and so many others who had been rendered invisible. For every step forward we took, there was a counter-impulse that threatened to pull us back. In the following days, Lucas and I decided we needed to intensify our efforts. Frustrated but determined, we organized a new series of events, panels, and discussions. We mapped out a plan on how to bring Samuel's story to a wider audience. We needed partners, artists, curators, critics, and academics who were willing to listen and share. We needed to create a platform that allowed these voices to be heard. Over time, what emerged was a true support network. The event began to gather unexpected allies, all united by the idea that art is not just an individual expression, but a reflection and a vehicle of collective meaning. We established partnerships with other galleries and artists who became ambassadors for the fight for recognition. During a particularly intense day of meetings, conversations, and brainstorming, Lucas turned to me and said, "Let Samuel be our guide. We need to let him inspire us as we move forward." That phrase resonated with me like a calling. As a result, we began each event by giving voice to Samuel, making him not just a character in the story we were telling, but an icon of our own artistic battles. The planning nights were filled with laughter, doubts, and above all, ambition. We were able to organize a large symposium in his honor at the auditorium of the local university's art college, where we could discuss not only his work, but also the impact that the recognition of the lost artwork has on all artists struggling for validation. Artists were invited to present in a way that generated dialogue, and the event promised to be a landmark in the re-evaluation of what represents the struggle for art. With some apprehension, I sent invitations to increasingly famous critics who had initially doubted us. Part of me was excited by the possibility of having them there, open to the new narrative. But another part was apprehensive, thinking about the reactions we might still receive. My fingers trembled slightly as I sent the emails, but there was a growing certainty that everything we were doing was finally starting to have a real impact. The day of the symposium finally arrived. An electrifying atmosphere dominated the College of Fine Arts. The auditorium was packed. Vibrant conversations floated in the air as the audience gathered, a mix of young art students, professors, critics, and contemporary artists. Now I felt a palpable energy instead of nervousness. Samuel's story had captured hearts, and what could have been a thorny path had transformed into a collective space of empathy. Lucas stood up to welcome everyone, and his presence was solidly firm. The symposium's theme, "The Voices of Silence, Rediscovering the Art of Samuel Ribeiro and the Artistic Struggle," set the tone for the discussion and made those present feel interconnected by their individual stories and at the same time by a collective narrative. When it was my turn to speak, my heart pounded, but not with the anxiety of before. What erupted was a wave of renewed passion. We are here not only to discuss Samuel's art, but to give voice to all those who have fought and are still fighting to be heard. Art is a portal, not only to time, but to the understanding of human joy and pain, I said, acknowledging the impact that Samuel's art could have on our lives and our future. The experts and artists began to share their stories, their challenges, and their victories. A deep connection formed between everyone present. Conversations not only about art, but about vulnerability and courage began to emerge, and slowly, I realized that once again, we were being reborn together. Each account shared in that space was a reminder that we all carry excerpts of each other's lives. And so, as the symposium progressed, the conversation extended beyond what I could have imagined. Criticisms and discussions about contemporary art became dialogues about the struggle for silenced voices. We heard stories that resonated throughout the audience, challenging and inspiring a new understanding of art and its relationship with humanity. At the end of the day, as the auditorium lights began to fade, a deep sense of accomplishment filled my chest. We were united. Samuel's art extended beyond the canvas and became a symbol of what it truly means to deal with authenticity in a confusing and not always welcoming world. There was an energy of collective struggle, and finally, it was a powerful reminder that, despite the challenges, art had the power to unite. With the voices of Samuel and all those who felt inspired to fight for their art, we were ready to face the world with tenacity. And so, the journey that began long ago, with a forgotten painting, was now transforming into a wave of change, where each creator, each voice, and each story was an essential part of a larger movement. It was more than resistance. It was the affirmation that art has the power to transform lives, and at the same time, connect human beings in their search for truth, beauty, and meaning. As we looked to the future, we knew we were only beginning to understand the true essence of art and life. Months passed since Samuel Ribeiro's exhibition, and the wave of recognition for his work went beyond what we could have imagined. The impact of his life and art began to take shape in a broader cultural movement. Stages where voices were once silenced were now being heard and celebrated. Events and exhibitions dedicated to forgotten artists began to emerge, and Samuel's memory was not just a distant echo. It was a symbol of hope and renewal. My life, too, seemed to have changed. With Samuel's growing notoriety, my role as an art restorer and advocate became more significant. I'm part of a network of artists, critics, and advocates united in the fight for recognition and the retelling of stories that have long been marginalized. There was a renewed sense of purpose in every project I undertook, and my desire to empower art narratives grew stronger each day. However, it wasn't long before critical voices emerged. A provocative article by Robert Silva, who had previously been skeptical of us, now questioned whether our romanticized view of Samuel's life was truly fair. He accused our movement of disregarding the genuine challenges many artists faced. "You must be aware that your perspective might be limited," he said during a meeting. "Romancing Samuel's life doesn't do justice to his true struggle. It's a necessary critique." His words resonated in my mind. Doubt began to crack my optimism, and the distance between us widened. Lucas and I met to discuss this new challenge. "We need concrete data, evidence of authenticity," I said, my tone resolute. "It's not enough to just tell the story. We need to legitimize it in every aspect." With renewed determination, I decided to investigate Samuel's history further. Together with Lucas, I contacted other critics and historians who could provide support. I initiated collaborations with labs that could conduct chemical tests on the painting, trying to ensure that our narrative didn't rely solely on feelings, but also on tangible proof. At the same time, the fight for forgotten voices began to take on new dimensions. My days were filled with meetings with young artists, promoting events that encouraged free expression. The symposium we organized became a platform where not only Samuel was celebrated, but all artists whose stories were on the margins of art history. The annual festival I proposed became acclaimed, a celebration bringing together artists from diverse generations. During that historic event, each artist had the chance to share their experiences, creating a vibrant tapestry of interconnected stories. My heart swelled with pride as I saw packed rooms, people sharing their struggles and triumphs over what art meant to them. The impact of our actions seemed to finally be materializing. And, as the conversations deepened, I realized we weren't just a group of artists. We were a movement. The festival became a symbol of the collective effort for recognition and dignity, a space where art became a vehicle for social transformation. One evening, as I looked out at the audience and listened to the stories emerging, a wave of emotion washed over me. What began as a simple fight for the authenticity of a painting had transformed into something much larger. A cry for justice, a celebration of what it means to be human. The continued response we were receiving from the community was passionate. A growing number of artists began to speak out, and each life story became an intricate piece of the mosaic we were creating together. Their courage and vulnerability intertwined in the narratives we brought to light, showcasing not only the successes but also the difficulties we all face in our pursuit of expression. As the date of the next symposium approached, there was a palpable anticipation. Established critics and artists confirmed their attendance, and I knew we needed to be prepared. There needed to be dialogue, a genuine connection with the audience. We invited emerging artists to share their journeys of struggle and success, and asked that they bring their works that most resonated with their experiences. On the day of the symposium, the day was sunny and vibrant, and the energy in the gallery was electric. Artists gathered in a space where art wasn't just observed, but lived. Each panel discussion revolved around authenticity, struggle, and the value of voices that were once forgotten or ignored. The presence of so much talent in one place was for me a powerful reminder that the fight for recognition is ongoing, and that we need to be united to leave a mark that resonates through time. The room filled with interwoven stories, sometimes intertwining, sometimes highlighting the particularities of each journey. When it was my turn to speak, the word resistance was incessantly on my mind. This isn't just the story of one artist. It's about each of us who fight to be heard in a world of indifference. The energy in the room transformed into an electric current. What began as a formal presentation transformed into a space of open dialogue, where people asked questions and shared experiences related to what they were hearing. What could have been an isolated event now became a continuous movement that encouraged everyone around us to join in the fight for artistic authenticity and the recognition of emotions and stories worth telling. At the end of the day, I realized this new reality wasn't just about art. It was about the ability to listen and connect with others. Looking out at the audience, each face reflected a mixture of hope and determination that resonated with my own feelings. What began as a solitary journey had evolved into a vibrant movement where every creator had their place at the table. Thus, Samuel Ribeiro's journey became a powerful metaphor for resilience and unity. And in the heart of every discussion, in the essence of every painting, and in every particle of emotion that filled the gallery, I recognized that we were all finally where we belonged. Together, we were ready to face the world and shape realities where art and life intertwine in a beautiful tapestry of human expression.